Hola, buenas tardes, bienvenidas todas, bienvenidos. Vamos a hablar hoy, como creo que ya sabréis, de Las batallas de la bici, un libro de James Longhurst, editado por Carasusán y que yo traduje al castellano. Como vamos a hablar con James, la mayor parte de la charla va a ser
buenas tardes,
en inglés, pero
bienvenidas
voy a hacer
todas,
primero una
bienvenidos.
pequeña introducción en castellano. Luego
Vamos
James
a hablar
y yo
hoy, como creo que
hablaremos
ya
un poco del
sabréis,
libro,
de las batallas de la
después
bici.
haré un pequeño resumen de lo que hemos comentado y si alguien tiene preguntas, pues las dejaremos para el final.
Castellano.
Y podréis preguntarle a James lo que queráis, o bueno, a mí,
Como
pero
vamos a hablar con
entre los dos
James,
supongo que James
la
tendrá
mayor
más
parte
cosas
de la
que decir.
charla va a ser
Buenas
en
tardes,
inglés, pero buenas a todas,
os presento
bienvenidos.
un poquito a James antes de empezar con él. James es
Luego vamos a hablar
profesor de
hoy,
la Universidad
como
de
creo que ya
Wisconsin
sabréis,
en La Crosse,
de las batallas de la
es
bici.
historiador medioambiental
de lo que hemos comentado
y de políticas públicas. Y bueno, el libro, Las batallas de la bici,
Como vamos a hablar con
entre los
James,
en realidad, por supuesto, habla de bicis, claro, pero en realidad es un libro que habla de los espacios comunes, de cómo distribuir los espacios comunes, del uso que la sociedad les da a esos espacios y de cómo la ciudad ha llegado a ser tal y como es. Eso es un poco de lo que nos habla James. Y por eso encaja muy bien en la línea más o menos de las cosas que ha publicado Catacrack. Esta charla se enmarca en el Radical May, que es un acto organizado por la Fira Literal para dar visibilidad a editoriales radicales, pequeñas, políticas, etc. Seguramente ya visteis que Catacrack ya organizó una charla la semana pasada y creo que la semana que viene tienen otra, el 26 de mayo. Van a hablar del libro Bost egun bost gau, con Íñigo Roque, su traductor, y me parece que doy, de Catacrack. Y eso, acordaos de que la semana que viene tenéis otra sesión, que por cierto me ha parecido ver también que ha iniciado Catacrack una campaña de socios, así que si queréis podéis mirar sus redes o su página web, porque ya sabéis que en estos momentos que son un poco convulsos hay que insuflar un poco de aire en estas redes sociales, culturales, vecinales, etc. Pero bueno, dejando todo esto aparte, ya os he comentado un poco la estructura, voy a pasar a saludar a James. So, hi, James, how are you? How are you living this strange lockdown?
I'm good, thank you. It's the end of the spring semester here, and we haven't been meeting our students at university for 2 months, of course. But it's the end of the semester, and I'm finishing the grades for my students' work now.
Okay, so I was saying in Spanish, I was just saying that, well, you're an associate professor at Wisconsin La Crosse University. And, well, you're an environmental historian and, well, policy historian. And I was just saying that the book, well, it's called Bike Battles, but it actually revolves around much more than bikes. I mean, it's bikes and how they shape our urban environment, our cities, how we live, everything around our way of living, and the commons. And
Right.
that's why I think it fits very well in Catacrack idea. So
right,
first,
and if this book was just about riding bicycles, it wouldn't go very far. It wouldn't have much meaning beyond just people who ride bicycles. But I'm a historian of, I say urban environmental policy. I usually mean it to say I write the history of how we've lived in cities and how we've made decisions that have shaped our cities that are in fact in many ways very unhealthy or very unsafe or more clearly not sustainable, right? That they can't last environmentally. And so for me and for my research, my question is, how did we do this thing which seems impossible, which is to make a place to live which is an unhealthy place to live? How is that possible? And my first book and my doctoral dissertation were about air pollution in cities and air pollution control and how we both live and work in cities, and sometimes the work makes it impossible to live. And so these are my questions. My most important questions are about cities and the decisions that we make in them that either make them unhealthy or healthy. And I had written that first book in my doctoral dissertation, and air pollution is interesting, but it seemed that people didn't care about it. It didn't resonate. It didn't have any meaning for outside of the people who really, really cared about air pollution. There was no larger interest. Looking for.
Estamos teniendo algún problema técnico. Vamos a consultar a encargados de la técnica.
Are we back?
Oh, yeah, we're
Okay.
back. Okay, I was just wondering where you're going.
So I was saying that, you know,
Keep on.
that I'm a historian of cities first, and for me, bicycles are a vehicle to understand cities and the conflicts we have in them. And I'm both a historian and a cyclist, but my overall goal is to understand cities. So what else can I tell you about the book or the title?
Well, actually, I was thinking that you, being an environmental historian, okay, that was more or less my first question when I started working on the book. Why had you decided to incorporate that piece of your private life, we would say, as a commuter, as a cyclist?
Yes.
Why would you have focused your research on that very specific part of urban planning or urban history, mobility history, whatever? So I don't know, is there any specific reason why you did so, or?
And I would say that this is something that makes academic historians nervous sometimes when a historian's writing is more clearly about their lives and their personalities. And some academic historians are accepting of this, that when we write as scholars and academics, we do so from a perspective, that there's no escape from that perspective. But for some academics, that is quite concerning, because they believe that such a way of writing biases or gives a subjective point of view. And academic historians are a mixed lot, but particularly amongst environmental historians, we come to these reasons, we come to these subject matters because we care deeply about them, and we are under no pretense that you can separate yourself from a scholarly academic objective view and who we are as people. As the historian Howard Zinn says, it's hard to be neutral on a moving train. You know, we are all going somewhere, and to pretend to be above it, to remove yourself from human society is impossible. But one of the reasons I brought myself into this book, and this book is as you said before, it's somewhat humorous and light and approachable. It's not purely academic history that would be not very approachable for the general public. And that's partly because this is my second book, and my first book and my doctoral dissertation are the entry into academic history. But because this is my second book, I get to choose a bit more, and I got to choose to make a book that I hoped would take some of the concerns that environmental historians have, like understanding the commons, like understanding the shape, the social history that shapes policy outcomes. Who is a bicycle rider shapes how laws and politics and policy are written. And to take those ideas that academics know and to bring them to a broader audience, to bring them to a general readership. And so that's why this book both has some of the ideas from political science, ideas about path dependency or contingency or the commons. And these are academic concepts. But I'm also bringing in comic books and Boy Scouts and movies and other things to sort of illustrate these academic ideals. I said that this is my second book, so I get to choose to make it more accessible. But one of the things I would also say is that I'd also like academics to care about the bicycle as having meaning in history, and to not dismiss it as a toy, but to say that it is part of our histories just as much as things that historians have paid a lot of attention on in the past: leadership, politics, wars, generals. But also the way we live day to day in cities matters, because that is our relationship with our environment, just as much as larger concepts. So the bicycle's history is a part of our lives within cities and within nations. So it's difficult to please both sides, the scholarly and the academic. But I would like academic historians here in the United States, academic historians have particularly not taken the bicycle seriously as a research subject. It's something to be taken lightly, or it's a child's toy, or it has no meaning, or it has no history. And I wanted to say to those academics, no, actually, there are some things here that are important, and also here's some history that has been missed. And I think that parts of the book, particularly about the side path movement in the 1890s, and then the victory bike in World War II, that history was just there. It was lying there and in the archives, and no one had written about it. And I was actually sort of embarrassed at how easy it was to do that research. I believe that I'm a good researcher, but none of this was hidden. It was just there, and no one had thought it was important enough to take note of, but I believe it is.
Yeah, well, actually, you mentioned several points I find very, very interesting. First of all, you say the book is very approachable, and I completely agree. It's a very fun reading. I mean, I have to admit, when I started working on the book, people used to ask me, "Oh, what are you working on?" And when I answered, "Well, it's a book about the commons, policies, mobility policies, and so on," people was like, "Well, that sounds quite boring." And I was like, "No, I'm really having a lot of fun. I mean, it's very, very entertaining." One of the things I really liked is how much popular culture is inserted in the book. I mean, I took advantage of it, and I watched I Love Lucy episode, Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah.
I was very surprised. I mean, it's quite funny and entertaining.
Well,
And
let me say that I want to thank you, Laura. That if people are watching, they don't know that we've not had a chance to speak
yep.
by video or by face. So this is my first opportunity to meet you, and I want to thank you for your work. And it's a delight to be translated. It's a new experience for me, and I really appreciate the work that you've done to not only translate language but meaning, but also historical references. And you say, well, it's sort of light and funny, and sometimes that's the most difficult thing to translate. And I very much appreciate your ability to go beyond the words and to find meaning. One of the things about popular culture in the book is that I think it serves to make the book more approachable, because I'm not just talking about congressional hearing testimony or legal history, and that's much more approachable to a general readership. But also partly some of the popular culture is in the book because that covers time periods or topics where the other sources were not available, where I could not find governments or law courts or frozen or back. And sometimes it was difficult to find archival sources, and so I would go to popular culture. I would go to television and film and comic books in order to tell that story. And so it serves both the purpose of making it interesting and filling in those gaps, because it's not just academic historians who don't take the bicycle seriously. Quite often others don't take it seriously as a part of cities or of transportation. And because of that, it's been disadvantaged as a sustainable means of mobility and transportation.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking when I was hearing you talk about it, I was thinking, well, that was one of the things. Well, first of all, you're welcome, because as I told you, I really enjoyed translating the book. It was a very good experience for me. I really liked it, and all those cultural references were one of the things I thought would be more difficult, because the book is very centered. I mean, it's states-centered, North America-centered.
Yes.
And I thought maybe that would be a problem for Spanish-speaking readers to understand everything, because as you mentioned several times in the book, bike evolution in Europe was a bit different. I mean, I don't know if it was a huge difference, but there were some differences. But when I came to think about it, actually, well, now I have a reference for Spanish speakers, but I was thinking about Verano Azul, for example. Verano Azul is a series that was very popular here, I don't know, in the 70s, I think. And it was about several families in a holiday town, typical holiday town. And the parents were just drinking beer around, and the kids were all the time in the bikes having many adventures.
Yeah.
And I thought that, well, you're right. It's a different situation. We have different societies, different cultures that have brought us to different cities and different points. But that idea that you mentioned of bikes being despised or looked over, and yeah, despised as childish, I think it's quite common also in Europe. Maybe not in every country, but
Right.
yeah, we have this idea of being something, childish, I think.
And I don't want to say that that the U.S. or the American experience is unique in the world. I don't believe that. But I am a historian of the United States, and so I don't have expertise in understanding Europe. And the only really non-American parts of this book are about Japan and Japan's bike culture under American occupation after World War II. But one thing I think is true is that American automobility and the structure of automobile transportation has spread throughout the world in many locations and in many different ways, but it has some of the same ideas from place to place to place. And there's differences. One of the major differences between European bicycling and American bicycling is in many European examples, we see the bicycle associated with working class politics. So the bicycle is the transportation and the symbol of the working man. And sometimes it even becomes an issue for working class political groups. And I can find almost no example of that in America. There's very, very little in the 1890s or so when in America it's associated with upwardly mobile white collar workers, clerks and young men in cities. But then after the 1890s, it disappears as a symbol of blue collar labor. And so when I talk to many Europeans, they're like, well, but what about the bicycle as part of politics? And it's not here, not in the same way. And I think that this is one of the things about transportation cultures are local. They affect each other around the globe, and some of the same things reoccur, but they are also defined by culture and by politics and by geography. And I think that this is important news because it means that we can control them. That if they're different from place to place, it's not universal. It means that we can make decisions that design or structure or make our cities healthier or more sustainable in the future. Because if they were all the same, it would mean that it was unchangeable, and that's not true.
Yeah, about that other political issue that is having some relevance here in Europe related to bikes, I think it's all these delivery services like Deliveroo and Glovo and so on. When I was translating the book, I kept thinking about it when you wrote about the delivery boys, all the cases, the newspaper boys that didn't have any work right, and they have so many problems in court to be acknowledged as victims and so on. So I kept thinking about this parallel, this parallelism. I'm not sure if you see it as comparable or equivalent, or if you see the difference in status. I don't know. I kept thinking about it.
This is very good, and my sort of confidence in saying something mostly comes from being a historian and looking at the past. And you know the book stops in the 1980s, and I get less assured of my observations or critical view when we come into the present. But I think you're absolutely right. One of the major differences might be the companies involved, that in a neoliberal 21st century where these companies are quite often venture capital funded, they basically, many of these delivery companies or Uber or Jump or other companies that are moving into transportation are doing so with significant stock investments backing them. And I'm not certain that that's true of the Western Union telegraph delivery boys and the newspaper delivery boys of the 19-teens, though those are, for their era, high technology companies. Telegraph is cutting edge, and that last mile, the connection between the end user and the local origin, that's very similar. And the limited rights of that key link, that last mile, I think that's the same.
Yeah, so let's see what can, I mean, that was just, I was thinking about it because it was just what you were saying. It's the reality we are living in has an effect on the policies on reality. They are, well, they are intertwined, I guess. Well, another thing that I was really shocked at as a linguist when I started working on the book was about, well, not really shocked, I was a bit mad even. I mean, it was about terminological diversity. Wow. When I had to confront all the bike lane, bike route, side path, bike path, whatever, I got crazy. And that was just on the English-speaking side. But when I went to the Spanish-speaking regulations just to check, trying to find an equivalent, well, they were not the same, but trying to find something similar, I found out that it was quite the same in the Spanish-speaking world. I mean, we have
the diversity of terms, that there's many different words.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I was very, very surprised because, well, I understand what you say, and it's the central idea in the book that it comes from, well, it evolves as the world evolves. I mean, it comes from different situations. We have different solutions, side paths or bike lanes, whatever. But I'm very surprised because we seem to be getting to a common model, apparently, but still in this field of the bike mobility, we don't seem to be reaching any agreement, not on terminology, and of course, not on modality. I mean, we have many different options, and it's crazy.
And this is one of the major things. You know as well as I know, as well as everyone, that I'm very interested in names for things, because the names come from different time periods. And the fact that there's many different names for different kinds of facilities or designs reflects confusion and disagreement, but also reflects the fact that the cities that we live in feel final. When you and I live in cities, we look around and the city is an enormous assemblage of concrete and solid pavement and ground and building, and it feels completed, or it feels final or unchanging. But if you think as a historian, the city changes, and its shapes, its locations, its size, and its connections through transportation. The city changes extensively from decade to decade, from generation to generation. And this is, I believe, one of the liberating powers of history. It might even be a liberating power of a bicycle, but it's definitely a liberating power of history, is that when you come to understand that the world as we see it is not the only outcome, or is not the only shape or form that was possible, that in fact many different cities have been envisaged and built or argued over. And this is freeing, because it means we can build a better city, we can build a better life, or perhaps a different, if not necessarily better. And this diversity of names for bicycle infrastructure, from bridle path, cycle path, side path, bike lane, segregated bike lane, physical bike lane. So these are all, these are often alternate visions of the city. And the way I like to say this to city engineers or to public policy planners is that the city might be poured in concrete, but it's not carved in stone, meaning it's not permanent. We can and have envisioned other options. This, for historians, this is the idea of contingency, that the outcome that we see around us seems final, like the railroad tracks have always been pointing in only one direction. But contingency is the understanding that historical outcome is dependent on sometimes very small chance. Out of many different options, one or two became the outcome, and it's not necessarily by fate or order or intention, and it's not necessarily for the good. So when you have this diversity of bicycle lanes or structures, I take this to have much larger meaning than just where we can ride our bicycles. Sorry, I got a little bit philosophical there.
Well, you're allowed to.
Thank you very much.
It's very book, so you can do whatever you want. No. Well, about this thing, about what you are saying about the very small changes can have huge, contingency. They can have huge things. I also wanted to know your standpoint, your opinion on how we will come out of this strange situation we are living in. Because, well, I forgot to say it before, but actually, this presentation was supposed to take place physically in Barcelona, and it wasn't possible. But well, we are here and we're happy to be here. But well, I've thought a lot about it, because I don't know how the situation is right now there in the States. Here, around here in Europe, we have
complicated.
Yeah, I guess. In Europe, we are having many different approaches to this regarding bikes and mobility and urban planning. And well, for example, in Paris, the mayor is trying to open up new, and Hidalgo is trying to open up new bike lanes. In some big cities around here, in Madrid, Barcelona, and so on, they are closing to cars and automobiles some big streets, but it seems to be just temporary. I mean, we have many different approaches, and we don't really know how this coronavirus crisis is going to affect urban planning and transportation and mobility. Because on the one hand, I was thinking, well, we are told not to use very much public transport because it's difficult to keep a physical distance there. And also the gas price is plummeting. So I guess that would make people use cars more. But on the other hand, at the same time, we are being told that using the bike is a very good way to keep this physical distance, this social distancing. And also we know that environment has a lot to do with coronavirus, health, pandemics. So I was thinking about it, and I don't really know if it's going to balance, or where is it going to, where is the critical point? What do you think about it?
I have no solution either.
I know.
I know. So one of the ideas from the book is a political science idea called path dependency, which is the idea that in the present, our universe of decisions that are open to us. We could go this way, or we could go this way. We could go on this path or this path. But the choice that we make, say if we go on this path and we go down that path for a while, once we're down that path, the decisions that are open to us are constrained by the decisions that we made in the past. That is, sometimes my students, we talk about this idea and they feel very constrained. They're like, oh, well, the past has trapped us. The decisions that people made in the past have now trapped us, and we can't make these decisions over here that we would like to make because they have created institutions or structures or designed a physical city that constrain our available options. And that's true. And this is one of the things that I was attempting to look at in the book, and to say that repeatedly through the 20th century, decisions were made that constrained future options to emphasize the automobile. That there could have been a more successful side path movement in the 1890s, and that would have created a network of non-automobile paths that would connect American cities with their surroundings. And that network was envisioned but never built, except in a very few places. And so I wanted to say that choice to not create that network constrained future choices. And then also the experience of World War II, Americans could have been encouraged to turn to the bicycle as transportation, and they were sort of encouraged to do so in name only, in word only. The policies or the decisions that would have supported such a transportation network weren't created. Americans were urged to ride a bicycle instead of driving a car, but then there was no support for that choice. And so at the end of World War II, Americans went back to driving cars in an even greater numbers. And so this idea about path dependency, it emphasizes choice. And in some ways, our pandemic here in the present, we're constrained by the past. We're constrained by the fact that for decades, cities didn't build or didn't support other modes of getting around. And that includes sidewalks and non-car streets and transit, but also bicycles. And so it's only some cities have more infrastructure for bicycling than others. And some cities recently, in recent decades, were expanding that. But when the pandemic hits, we are trapped by the decisions of the past. We can't suddenly say the automobile cannot exist because entire societies and economies and populations depend upon it. And also we built our cities for it. But one of the things when my students get a little depressed and they say, well, we're handcuffed, we're trapped by the past, the past decisions on path dependency, have trapped us in the present, and we can't make healthier or more sustainable cities because of past decisions. And my point for them is, I say to them, yes, but we are also the future's past. And the decisions we make now, the cities we build now, will either constrain or free the future people who live in those cities. So this pandemic, we might be trapped by our decisions to make an automobile-centric city in the past, but there's no reasons that we can't make the future city different. And I think that this is a good example. This pandemic is a good example of contingency as well, because 3 months ago, who could imagine that this would be the discussion? 3 months ago, I was still having conversations and arguments with people about the importance of driverless cars in redesigning our cities. That is no longer a conversation we're having right now. I mean, we might in the future, but it's not right now. And so clearly contingency, the unpredictability of history, is something that we are seeing here. And you are right, it could be heaven or it could be hell. But I would say the fact that heaven is a possibility should inspire us to try.
Well, sure. That's that would a perfect end for the conversation, actually. I don't know if I want to follow or just leave it here, but well, just a little comment before summarizing and getting to the questions, if we have any. Well, just related to all this you were saying, I was also thinking about what you said in World War II. You talk in the book a lot about victory bikes, yeah, and how they were supposed to be a solution to this. I was thinking if maybe now we could get into a similar idea. I mean, I don't know if it's a question of psychological change in the public's idea of bikes, and if bikes are going to become the savior of the pandemic and so on, or if it's much more a question of a materialistic change. I mean, you need to build whatever bike lanes from where you live to where you work with the necessary width. I mean, I don't know. Do you think a plan like that would work? Well, actually, it didn't work very well in the past, this victory bike scheme, but maybe it's a good time for bike advocates to try to push it. I don't know. What do you think about it?
Or even if not policies that support the bicycle, then at least scaling back policies that support the automobile. And this is a real conversation to look at laws and economics and legal structures that really lock many populations into the automobile as the only option for them. So I would certainly like to see a world in which governments supported, subsidized, encouraged, made possible bicycle transportation. But if I can't live in that world, then at least what I'd like to see is a decrease in auto-centric policy, which for many groups of people has made the automobile the only option for them. And the automobile is an incredibly expensive habit to support in many ways, and so it has to be subsidized. Those subsidies include building networks of roads that require extensive maintenance And that subsidy includes maintaining prices for fossil fuels. And that subsidy includes rewriting laws related to insurance liability or to traffic codes that prioritize automobile drivers. And so if I can't have policies that support the bicycle, then at least we can reconsider policies that lock users into one transportation mode and support and subsidize that over others. I think that was my great finding of the Victory Bike, is that people, particularly American bicycle advocates, looked at the Victory bicycle and they wanted it to be a great example of success, of the bicycle rising to save the day in a crisis, in an emergency, in a temporary situation. And certainly what I found as a historical researcher is not what people wanted to believe about the Victory bicycle, that they wanted to believe that, in fact, it was an example of a rare example of a federal policy, that encouraged bicycles. But what it turned out to be when I went into the archives is an example where the federal government in the United States said that they were going to support the bicycle and then actually did not. And the Victory Bike program was an opportunity for policy that would encourage other means of getting around cities. And it turned out to be a missed opportunity. And it actually seems so easy for me in these moments of crisis for entrepreneurial politicians, including Anne Hidalgo, but it's actually mayors throughout Latin America. It's mayors throughout Europe, mayors very often through parts of the United States who are looking at our public streets as a commons, and they're realizing there's multiple users, and some of those users might be children who need a playground. And in this moment of crisis, perhaps the automobile doesn't need to control every single bit of the commons. Perhaps a little piece of it, perhaps a little street can be set aside for restaurants, for children to play, for other means of getting around the city. And I think that that's happening in many places, and many politicians are seeing this as an opportunity. I would say that many other politicians have missed the opportunity, and perhaps they can't even be persuaded in the middle of crisis. But I strongly think that New York City has missed a significant opportunity here to preserve its form and its shape and its purpose for the future. And this variation between cities is something that's always existed, but perhaps this crisis will sort out some from others.
Yeah, well, actually, now that we are on lockdown, it's been, what you say, it's been more obvious than ever how we value the commons. I mean, we are all looking for a space we can use. We are enclosed at home and we are looking forward to get out and have some space, some room for us. So I think it's that idea is very clear right now. We are all trying to have our space. I mean, that's one of the things I really liked about the book. I'm much more a pedestrian than a cyclist, actually. But that idea, I found it very relatable, actually. It happens to all of us if we are not motorists. I mean, if we don't drive a car, we all can relate to that feeling of cyclists. So,
and to be clear, I'm an American, so I drive an automobile. I grew up in the American West, so I drive a truck. You know, I'm also a user of the commons of the road in many ways, but the immense popularity of the automobile doesn't change the fact that the street is a commons and has many other purposes, including including street vending, including promenade and parade, including protest, and also transmission of many other things, not just automobiles. Just because one user has become immensely popular doesn't mean it can be the only user, that it can force out every other use. And this has been a difficult thing to tell people because of the popularity of the automobile and the fact that it also increases risk for other users, say, for example, pedestrians. So there is no possibility of creating automobile-only cities because humans are the reasons that cities exist, and they don't lose other means of moving or of freedom. But the immense popularity of the automobile has come very close to crowding out other uses of the city. And I think that having a city under lockdown has shown many of us that the city can be something different. It can be quieter. It can be sometimes quiet is bad. It can be space for other uses, living as well as moving by automobile.
Well, I think we could leave it with that idea. The book touches on many other subjects. It is very wide-ranging. It speaks a lot about taxation and the effect. It analyzes the gender, class, and race differences mirrored in the bike. I mean, it has many different topics, but I think we could focus on those ideas, like cities are organic.
And I'll say also, this is, I've very much enjoyed having you work in translation and to have another audience for this, but to also say, I think that there are historians working in many different languages and scholars working in many different languages who are also taking the bike seriously now. And there's not only, I think, a new wave of bicycle scholarship in Europe and the US, but I believe that there's a new wave of coming pedestrian scholarship in the US as well, as we rethink what the cities of the future could be.
Okay, very well. A very nice closing idea. I'm going to summarize a little bit in Spanish, but very short, because I really can't summarize everything. And let's see if we have any questions. And if not, we're closing. So, vale, cambio. A ver, voy a cambiar mi mente. Decía James, bueno, hemos hablado un poquito, para los que hayáis entendido un poquito menos, pues eso, le preguntaba al principio un poco qué le había llevado a él, que es un historiador centrado en políticas públicas y políticas medioambientales, a centrarse tanto en la bici. Y me decía que realmente utiliza la bici como vehículo para reflejar cómo hemos construido las ciudades. Al final es una cosa, ha insistido mucho en la idea, como también se hace en el libro, de que las ciudades son algo orgánico que nosotros modificamos con nuestros comportamientos, con nuestra forma de movernos, nuestra forma de actuar, y es una de las ideas en las que más hincapié ha hecho. De hecho, cuando le preguntaba, pues eso, por qué existen tantas opciones diferentes, ¿no? Pues tenemos carril bici integrado en la carretera, segregado, separado con una barrera física. Bueno, tenemos 1000 opciones, tanto en Estados Unidos como aquí. Y me decía que eso, que al final es la idea de que cada uno venimos de nuestras circunstancias, con nuestra geografía, nuestras circunstancias sociales y económicas, y eso nos va cerrando caminos, por así decirlo, pero sin caer en el desánimo, porque al final eso también significa que no es algo estático. Vemos la ciudad como algo estático, que está ahí, parece que está terminado, que es algo ya cerrado, pero en realidad no. En realidad nosotros tenemos capacidad para cambiar eso Y para ir modelando un poquito, como ha dicho James, somos el pasado del futuro. Entonces, nosotros somos los que tenemos que tomar ahora las decisiones que van a determinar eso en el futuro, que es en lo que estamos ahora mismo, en este momento en el que nos estamos replanteando tanto el uso del espacio común, cuando estamos todos metidos en casa, qué es la carretera, a quién pertenece, por qué parece que es algo reservado para los coches cuando no es así. El espacio público es de todos, pertenece a todos. Y creo que eso es un momento en el que nos estamos replanteando todo esto, que es en lo que insistía James, en eso y en la idea de que todo esto no es estático. Estamos aquí ante algo orgánico que tenemos que modelar nosotros. Así que nada, nos despedimos ya. Os vuelvo a recordar otra vez que hay una charla la semana que viene, el día 26, sobre el libro Bostegun Bostgau. Y nada, le agradezco muchísimo a James que haya estado con nosotros. So James, I'm very, very grateful to you for being here. Thank you very much for being here and talking to me. It's been a great pleasure, not just translating the book, but also talking about it with you. So,
Well, it was a delight seeing the book in translation. I very much enjoyed your work on it. This has been a good talk, but I have to go ride a bicycle now. I've been locked up inside for a very long time, and we can go for a bicycle ride. So I'm going to go.
yeah,
It's a very sunny day today.
We are about to be allowed to be out too. So, yeah, nosotros también nos vamos, que ya nos dejan salir. Así que nada, nos despedimos aquí. Muchas gracias y nada, hasta la próxima. Adiós.
Bye.